Did medieval women ever leave their castles? Did they only walk to the local market, their lives bounded by dusty village roads and kitchen fires? What if everything you thought about women and travel between the 5th and 15th centuries was just a story someone made up? Get ready to uncover the truth about women and travel during the medieval period. Number 9. Medieval society strictly forbade women from holding positions that required extensive travel. Many people think medieval women were locked away, never seeing the world beyond their immediate surroundings, let alone holding powerful roles that demanded journeys far from home. This common belief paints a picture of women only managing households, raising children, and engaging in local chores. But historical accounts show a different reality, one where women often held positions of authority that required them to be on the road, managing vast networks and representing significant interests. They were not just passive figures waiting at home, they were active participants in the wider world, navigating complex legal, religious, and political landscapes. One prominent example involves abbesses, the female heads of monastic communities. These powerful women were responsible for the spiritual and temporal well-being of their convents, which often owned extensive lands, collected rents, and engaged in various economic activities. To manage these properties, which could be scattered across different regions, abbesses frequently undertook extensive journeys. They traveled to inspect distant estates, negotiate land leases, attend church councils, and even meet with secular rulers or bishops to protect their community's rights and interests. An abbess like Hildegard of Bingen, a famous 12th century German mystic, composer, and writer, did not stay confined to her cloister. She traveled throughout Germany, preaching to large crowds, advising popes and emperors, and establishing new monastic foundations. Her journeys were not short strolls, they were significant expeditions involving wagons, horses, and a retinue of companions, spanning hundreds of miles to spread her religious and intellectual influence. Women also served as royal messengers and diplomatic agents, carrying important messages and negotiating treaties between kingdoms. Though less commonly documented than male counterparts, their participation in such high-stakes travel was not unheard of. A queen might send a trusted lady in waiting or a female relative to convey a secret message or to negotiate a marriage alliance. These women needed discretion, courage, and a thorough understanding of court politics. Their travels were official, often with escorts and safe conduct passes, demonstrating that their journeys were recognized and protected by powerful figures. These diplomatic missions were not just about delivering letters, they involved prolonged stays at foreign courts, subtle negotiations, and the careful observation of foreign customs and alliances. They were crucial in maintaining peace or forging new relationships between ruling families. Interstate managers, whether widows overseeing their late husband's properties or women from noble families managing their own dowries and inheritances, often had to travel to inspect their holdings. These estates might include multiple manors, farms, forests, and mills spread across different counties. Traveling to each property was essential for ensuring that rents were collected, crops were planted, and justice was administered. Lady Margaret Beaufort, mother of King Henry VII of England, provides a later medieval example of a woman who was a formidable estate manager. She traveled widely across her vast landholdings, inspecting properties, interviewing tenants, and overseeing financial matters. Her journeys were purposeful and frequent, demonstrating a hands-on approach to managing her considerable wealth and influence. She was not a figurehead, she was an active administrator who used travel as a tool of governance. Medical practitioners also traveled to offer their services. While many healers worked locally, some specialized in particular treatments or had reputations that drew patients from far and wide. Women who practiced medicine, midwifery, or herbal remedies might travel from village to village, or even to distant towns to attend to the sick. Their journeys were driven by necessity and the demand for their skills. Records from urban centers sometimes show women registered as medical practitioners who would have made house calls across the city or even traveled to nearby rural areas for patients who could afford their services. These women carried their knowledge and tools with them, embarking on journeys that were essential to their profession and the health of their communities. Even within the church, beyond abbesses, some devout women undertook pastoral duties or served as recluses who received visitors from various locations. While recluses often stayed in one place, their cell being attached to a church, the very act of seeking spiritual guidance from them implied that people traveled to them. Some female mystics also traveled to spread their messages or consult with religious authorities. The widespread belief that women were confined to domestic roles, unable to hold positions requiring mobility, overlooks the significant and varied ways medieval women navigated the world, performing duties that were crucial for their families, communities, and even kingdoms. Their travel was not just an exception, but a component of their established social and professional roles. Number 8. The physical challenges and lack of amenities made travel unbearable and impractical for medieval women. A common perception suggests that medieval travel was so rough and basic that it was simply not possible for women to undertake significant journeys, especially those involving physical discomfort or a lack of modern conveniences. The idea is that women, being perceived as delicate, would simply not be able to cope with muddy roads, hard saddles, cold nights, or the absence of clean lodging. This viewpoint often overlooks the resilience, adaptability, and sheer determination of medieval women, as well as the practical solutions they employed to make travel feasible. Medieval roads were certainly not paved highways, and weather could make them impassable. However, people traveled constantly, and women were part of this mobile society. They rode horses, often side saddle, or traveled in horse-drawn carts and wagons. For those on foot, distances were covered slowly but surely. Women were accustomed to a life that demanded physical robustness, whether in agricultural work, household management, or simply daily walking. They were not inherently fragile, their bodies were conditioned by a life of physical labor and movement, making them quite capable of enduring the rigors of travel. Accommodation options certainly differed from today's hotels. Travelers might stay in monasteries, convents, or private homes if they had connections. Past inns and taverns offered basic shelter, food, and drink, though conditions varied widely. While these places might not have offered private bathrooms or soft beds, they provided necessary respite. Women, like men, made use of these facilities. They adapted to shared sleeping arrangements, simple meals, and communal spaces. The concept of privacy and individual comfort was different in the medieval period, and women, like everyone else, lived within these norms. They would have carried essentials with them, such as bedding rolls, personal items, and provisions to enhance their comfort on the road. Clothing was also practical. While aristocratic women wore elaborate gowns for courtly occasions, their travel attire would have been more functional. The layers of wool and linen provided warmth and protection from the elements. Hooded cloaks shielded them from rain and wind. Shoes were sturdy and designed for walking or riding. As women also adopted certain riding styles or clothing modifications to make long journeys more comfortable, such as wearing split skirts or riding astride when necessary, despite the common imagery of side saddle riding. The clothes were made to be durable and to withstand the rigors of travel, not just for aesthetic appeal. Hygiene is another area where modern assumptions often overshadow historical realities. While bathing practices and public sanitation were different, people did practice hygiene, and women would have managed their personal cleanliness on the road as best they could. Rivers and streams provided water for washing. Many inns and homes had basic washing facilities. The travelers learned to make do with what was available, carrying cloths, soaps, and perfumes. They also understood the importance of keeping their clothes clean to prevent discomfort and illness. The expectation that cleanliness standards were so low as to render travel impossible for women ignores the practical daily habits of medieval people. Medieval women developed strategies to cope with the challenges. They traveled in groups for safety and companionship, sharing resources and duties. They relied on local hospitality networks and their social connections. They packed efficiently, bringing essential items but also being prepared to acquire provisions along the way. They understood the seasonal nature of travel and planned their journeys to avoid the harshest weather conditions when possible. The very fact that countless women undertook pilgrimages, visited relatives, conducted business, or moved for marriage across significant distances demonstrates that they found ways to manage the physical demands and the limited amenities. Their journeys were a testament to their resilience, their pragmatic approach to challenges, and their ability to adapt to the conditions of their time. Number 7. Medieval women never ventured into remote or masculine spaces like battlefields or distant foreign lands. A popular misconception suggests that medieval women were entirely absent from areas considered masculine, particularly battlefields, military camps, or far-flung foreign lands. This idea envisions women as solely belonging to the domestic sphere, far removed from the harsh realities of warfare or dangerous expeditions. However, historical records reveal that women were present in many surprising and often indispensable roles, even in these traditionally male-dominated environments. Their presence was not always about direct combat, though some women did fight, but rather about the logistical, social, and even spiritual support that was crucial for any large-scale undertaking, especially military campaigns or long-distance journeys. Military camps were not just collections of fighting men. They were temporary, mobile communities that required a wide range of services to function. Women served as camp followers, a broad term encompassing various roles. They were laundresses, washing and mending soldiers' clothes, a vital service for hygiene and morale. They were cooks, preparing meals for large numbers of people, ensuring the troops were fed and nourished. They were provisioners, selling food, drink, and other necessities to the soldiers, often traveling with armies to maintain supplies. These women often brought their children with them, creating a familial atmosphere in an otherwise brutal environment. Their presence was not incidental, it was integral to the logistics and daily life of a military force. They were not just tolerated, they were often expected and necessary. Some women even served as healers or nurses in military camps, tending to the wounded and sick. While formal medical training was limited, many women possessed extensive knowledge of herbal remedies and basic care. Their skills were invaluable in preventing infection and promoting recovery among soldiers who often faced injuries and diseases far from established medical centers. These women faced the same dangers as the soldiers, including exposure to disease, hunger, and violence. Their commitment to their roles meant they were constantly on the move, following the army's progress, setting up temporary camps, and enduring the same hardships as the combatants. Beyond support roles, some women found themselves directly involved in defending castles or towns during sieges. When fortresses were attacked, everyone inside, including women, was expected to contribute to the defense. Women often hauled stones, poured boiling water or pitch onto attackers, and even wielded weapons when necessary. Lady Nicola de la Haye, for example, famously defended Lincoln Castle in England against a siege in 1217, demonstrating exceptional military leadership and resilience. These instances highlight that women were not always passive victims during wartime. They were active defenders of their homes and communities, showing immense courage and tactical acumen. Women also journeyed to distant foreign lands, not only accompanying crusaders, but also as pilgrims, merchants, or even captives. During the Crusades, many women traveled to the Holy Land not just as camp followers, but as active participants. Some were noblewomen who financed expeditions or provided spiritual encouragement. Others were ordinary women who felt a religious calling to visit holy sites. Accounts from the Crusades mention women enduring the perilous journey, facing pirates, disease, and hostile territories. Their motivations were varied, but their willingness to embark on such dangerous long-distance travel demonstrates a significant departure from the idea of women being confined to their local villages. Explorers and missionaries, though predominantly male, sometimes had female companions who traveled with them to unknown territories. While their stories are often overshadowed, their presence on these expeditions meant they faced the same dangers and challenges as the men. Whether traveling to the Silk Road, the edge of known Europe, or the Holy Land, medieval women were not afraid to step into the remote and challenging landscapes of their world. Their journeys into these masculine spaces were often born of necessity, duty, or deep personal conviction, but they were unquestionably a part of the rich tapestry of medieval travel. Number 6. Medieval women did not participate in long-distance trade or commerce. The idea that medieval women were entirely excluded from trade, especially long-distance commerce, is a common but inaccurate assumption. Many people envision trade as a male-dominated world of merchants, ships, and bustling marketplaces, with women confined to household duties or local bartering. However, historical evidence clearly shows that women were active and often central figures in various aspects of trade and commerce, both locally and across significant distances. Their involvement ranged from managing family businesses to independently engaging in large-scale transactions. In many medieval towns and cities, women were essential to the local economy. They ran shops, stalls, and markets, and engaged in small-scale manufacturing. They sold everything from bread and ale to textiles, clothing, and candles. These women were not just helping their husbands. They were often proprietors in their own right, registered with guilds, and paying taxes. The city of London, for example, had female brewers, bakers, embroiderers, and fishmongers who operated their own businesses. While much of this was local, it provided a foundation for understanding commerce, and sometimes extended to regional trade networks. For long-distance trade, women participated in several ways. The wives of merchants often played a crucial role in managing the business while their husbands were away on journeys. This involved overseeing inventories, managing accounts, dealing with local suppliers and customers, and even making decisions about future purchases. A merchant's wife was not just a homemaker, she was a business partner who ensured the continuity of the enterprise. If the husband died, the widow often inherited the business and continued to run it, sometimes expanding it significantly. These women had extensive knowledge of market conditions, supply chains, and pricing, allowing them to make informed decisions that kept the business profitable. There are also instances of women directly engaging in long-distance trade themselves. While less common than male merchants traveling overseas, women did travel to markets in other towns or even abroad to buy and sell goods. Some women specialized in luxury items like textiles, spices, or furs, which were high value goods that often involved long distance transport. Records from trading hubs like Bruges, a major medieval commercial center, show female merchants involved in the textile trade, buying wool and selling finished cloth. These women would have traveled to fairs, negotiated prices, and arranged for the transportation of their goods, demonstrating their active participation in the wider European economy. The women were also involved in pilgrimage routes, which often doubled as trade routes. Pilgrims, both men and women, carried goods for trade or exchanged currency and engaged in commercial transactions along their journeys. While their primary purpose was religious, the economic opportunities presented by travel were often seized. Women traveling for religious reasons might carry small items to sell or trade to help finance their journey, or they might bring back unique goods from the holy sites to sell at home. Had this blending of religious and commercial motives allowed women to participate in what was effectively long-distance commerce. Furthermore, women of noble families often controlled vast estates that produced goods for sale, such as wool, grain, or wine. The sale and distribution of these products often required women to travel to regional markets or to send agents to negotiate with buyers from distant lands. The proceeds from these sales were crucial for the upkeep of their households and their social standing. The common assumption of women being absent from long-distance trade simply does not align with the historical presence of women as business managers, independent merchants, and active participants in the economic networks that spanned medieval Europe and beyond. Their involvement was often vital to the functioning of the medieval economy. Number 5. Medieval women always had to travel with male escorts and could never travel independently. The notion that medieval women were perpetually tethered to male escorts for any journey beyond their doorstep is a widely held belief, often fueled by images of damsels in distress or sheltered noblewomen. This idea suggests that independent female travel was either socially forbidden or too dangerous to contemplate. However, historical records and personal accounts paint a much more nuanced picture, showing that medieval women, across various social classes, frequently traveled alone or in female-only groups, driven by necessity, pilgrimage, business, or personal reasons. One significant group of independent female travelers was widows. Upon their husband's death, many widows gained a degree of financial and legal autonomy that was often denied to married women. They inherited property, managed estates, and became responsible for their family's welfare. This often necessitated travel to oversee their lands, conduct legal affairs, collect rents, or attend to business matters. A widow might travel to a distant court to defend her property rights or to a market to sell her goods. These journeys were undertaken out of necessity and often independently, as they were the head of their own household and decision makers in their own right. Their status allowed them freedoms that married women did not always possess. The single women, especially those from working classes, also traveled independently for work. Domestic servants, seamstresses, nurses, or laundresses might journey from one town to another in search of employment opportunities. Young women might leave their rural homes to seek work in larger urban centers where they could earn a living. These migrations were common and often involved solitary travel or travel with other young women. They were driven by economic necessity and the desire for a better life. Their journeys were not grand adventures, but rather practical movements essential for their survival and livelihood. Pilgrimage was another powerful motivator for independent female travel. While many pilgrims traveled in mixed groups, women frequently formed their own parties for safety, companionship, and shared spiritual devotion. The famous example of Marjorie Kempe, a 15th century English mystic, vividly illustrates this. She traveled extensively across Europe, including to Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago de Compostela. While she occasionally had male companions, she often traveled with female servants or other women pilgrims. Her autobiography details her independent decisions regarding her routes, her accommodations, and her interactions with others, showcasing a remarkable degree of autonomy. Her experiences were not unique. Countless other devout women embarked on similar journeys. Women who managed businesses or acted as merchants also traveled independently. As discussed earlier, women often ran family businesses or their own enterprises. This sometimes involved traveling to regional fairs, markets, or even port cities to procure goods or sell their wares. These journeys were purely commercial and often undertaken without male guardianship, as the woman was the primary decision-maker and representative of her business interests. They possessed the practical skills of navigation, negotiation, and financial management required for such undertakings. Even women seeking medical treatment might travel alone to consult a specialist or visit a healing shrine. Similarly, women involved in legal disputes might travel to the nearest court to present their case. The idea that women always needed a male chaperone discounts the myriad practical reasons that compelled women to move freely and independently across medieval landscapes. While societal norms and safety concerns did exist, the evidence shows that women, depending on their social standing, wealth, and purpose, were perfectly capable and often did travel without male escorts, navigating the world on their own terms. Number 4, medieval women who traveled only did so for religious pilgrimages. The common belief often limits medieval women's travel to a single, religiously motivated purpose pilgrimage. While spiritual journeys were indeed a significant reason for women to travel, this narrow view vastly underestimates the diverse array of motivations that led medieval women to embark on journeys, both short and long. Women traveled for economic reasons, family matters, health, education, legal obligations, and even warfare, demonstrating a far broader scope of mobility than often acknowledged. Economic necessity and opportunity were powerful drivers of female travel. As mentioned before, women were active in trade. Female merchants and craftswomen traveled to regional markets and fairs to sell their goods, buy raw materials, or showcase their skills. A brewer might travel to a nearby town to secure a better price for her ale, or a textile worker might journey to a fair to sell her finished cloth directly. These were not religious quests, but practical business trips, essential for their livelihood and the economic well-being of their families. Women also traveled to seek employment, moving from rural areas to burgeoning towns in search of work as domestic servants, weavers, or various other laborers. These migrations, often involving considerable distances, were purely driven by economic survival and the search for better prospects. Family matters frequently necessitated travel. Daughters traveled to their new homes upon marriage, sometimes across significant distances, particularly in aristocratic families where marriage alliances spanned kingdoms. Wives might travel to visit their birth families, maintaining ties across regions. Widows might journey to settle their late husband's estates, which could be scattered in different locations. Family reunions, births, and deaths also prompted travel, as relatives sought to be present for important life events. These journeys were personal but often crucial for maintaining social networks and family solidarity. Legal obligations also compelled women to travel. Women involved in lawsuits, whether as plaintiffs, defendants, or witnesses, had to appear in court, which might be in a distant city or a different jurisdiction. A woman claiming her inheritance or defending her rights to property would have undertaken a journey to present her case to the appropriate legal authority. These were often arduous trips, sometimes taking weeks, yet they were non-negotiable for securing their legal standing. Health and education also served as motivations for travel. Women might travel to seek specialized medical care from renowned healers or to visit specific healing shrines believed to possess miraculous cures. While often tied to religious sites, the primary motivation was the pursuit of physical well-being. For education, while formal schooling was less common for women, some noblewomen or those destined for positions as abbesses might travel to respected convents or courts to receive instruction in literacy, governance, or particular skills. The women seeking to enter a convent would also travel to their chosen institution, sometimes across considerable distances. Even in warfare, women were not just pilgrims. Women accompanied armies as camp followers, as discussed earlier, providing essential services. Some women from noble families followed their husbands on campaigns or pilgrimages to the Holy Land, managing their households even in the challenging environment of a crusade. These travels were directly linked to military or political endeavors, far removed from purely spiritual aims. The idea that medieval women only traveled for pilgrimage simplifies a much more complex and dynamic reality, where their mobility was driven by a diverse range of social, economic, and personal imperatives, reflecting their active participation in all facets of medieval life. Number 3. Only noble or very wealthy medieval women ever had the opportunity to travel. A pervasive misconception states that travel in the medieval period was an exclusive privilege of the rich and noble, implying that ordinary women from peasant or lower-class backgrounds were firmly rooted in their villages, never venturing far from home. This belief ignores the practical realities of medieval life and the diverse ways in which women from all social strata experienced mobility. While noble women certainly had resources that facilitated more comfortable and distant journeys, the lives of ordinary women were far from static. Their circumstances often compelled them to travel for survival, work, and community. And peasant women, despite being tied to the land, were not confined to their immediate village. They regularly traveled to nearby markets to sell surplus produce or crafts, and to buy necessary goods not produced at home. These market trips, though perhaps only a few miles, were regular journeys that took them beyond their fields and homesteads. They walked or sometimes rode on carts carrying their goods. These trips were essential for their economic well-being and connected them to a wider network of exchange and social interaction. They might also travel to neighboring villages for festivals, weddings, or funerals, maintaining social ties within their broader community. Women working in crafts and trades, as discussed, also traveled. A woman who spun wool or wove cloth might travel to a larger town to sell her finished textiles. A female potter might travel to a fair to display her wares. These were not grand journeys, but they were purposeful trips that took them away from their homes for days at a time, sometimes with goods to transport. These women were active participants in the regional economy, and their mobility was dictated by the demands of their craft. Even beggars, often overlooked in historical narratives of travel, were a significant segment of the mobile population, and many of them were women. Poverty forced them to move from place to place seeking alms, food, or temporary work. They walked along roads, stopping at monasteries, churches, and wealthy homes. Their travel was arduous and dangerous, but it was continuous and driven by the desperate need to survive. These women experienced the medieval landscape intimately, navigating its roads and relying on the charity of strangers. Women who became domestic servants often had to travel significant distances to find employment. A young woman from a poor family in a rural area might travel to a bustling town or a noble household to work. Once employed, she might accompany her mistress on journeys, whether to another estate, to court, or on a pilgrimage. While her travel was not independent, it was still a form of mobility that brought her into contact with new environments and experiences far from her birthplace. Her religious life also offered opportunities for travel to women of all classes. While noblewomen might endow convents, women from less affluent backgrounds also entered religious orders, which often meant traveling to the chosen convent. Once within the order, they might embark on pilgrimages or attend religious gatherings. The stories of ordinary devout women undertaking long pilgrimages, often on foot, attest to the fact that spiritual devotion transcended social barriers and enabled travel for those without wealth. The idea that only the wealthy traveled neglects the myriad ways in which women from all walks of life moved through the medieval world, driven by work, family, religion, or necessity, proving that travel was not just a luxury, but often a fundamental aspect of medieval existence. Number 2. Travel was far too dangerous for medieval women, making it practically impossible. The image of medieval roads as lawless, bandit-ridden thoroughfares, making travel for women practically impossible, is a common and dramatic fabrication. This misconception paints a picture of constant threat, where any woman venturing out alone would surely face peril. While medieval travel certainly had its dangers, and women were vulnerable, this view exaggerates the risks to the point of implying immobility. People traveled extensively during the Middle Ages, and women were part of that movement, employing various strategies to mitigate risks and ensuring their journeys were completed. The idea that danger made travel impossible for women is contradicted by the sheer volume of female travelers for all sorts of reasons. One of the primary ways to enhance safety was group travel. Most people, men and women alike, preferred to travel in groups when undertaking longer journeys. Pilgrims often formed large companies, like those famously described in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which provided safety in numbers. Merchants traveled in convoys. Women going to market might walk together. This communal approach to travel lessened the risk of banditry and provided mutual support against accidents, illness, or getting lost. If a woman needed to travel alone, she might join an existing group for a segment of her journey or hire a reputable guide. Royal or noble women often traveled with substantial retinues, including armed guards, servants, and chaplains. These large entourages offered significant protection and deterred potential attackers. Their journeys were official events, often with advance arrangements for lodging and security, making them relatively safer than independent travel. Kings and powerful lords issued safe conduct passes, official documents that guaranteed protection for travelers under their authority. Women who were diplomats, royal messengers, or prominent figures would often carry such passes, signaling their importance and granting them a measure of security on the road. Legal and administrative systems, though not as organized as modern ones, did exist to maintain some semblance of order. The local lords and kings had an interest in keeping trade routes and pilgrimage paths relatively safe, as these were vital for economic prosperity and political stability. Their punishments for robbery and violence against travelers were often severe, deterring some criminals. While law enforcement was decentralized, it was not entirely absent. Towns and villages along major routes would have had their own systems of watchmen or guards to provide some security. The notion that women were inherently more vulnerable and therefore immobile due to danger also overlooks their own resourcefulness and practical skills. Medieval women were not passive. They were accustomed to a challenging world and often possessed practical knowledge for self-preservation. They understood how to read landscapes, identify safe havens, and assess risks. They might travel with minimal valuable possessions to avoid attracting attention, or choose less frequented routes if they had local knowledge. While dangers like bad weather, accidents, illness, and robbery were indeed part of medieval travel for everyone, they did not render it practically impossible for women. The evidence of countless medieval women undertaking pilgrimages across continents, managing distant estates, engaging in long-distance trade, or relocating for marriage or work proves that they navigated these risks. They planned carefully, sought protection in numbers or through official means, and demonstrated immense resilience. The perceived impossibility of female travel due to danger is a modern oversimplification that fails to acknowledge the adaptability and determination of medieval women. Number 1. Medieval women were confined to their homes and never traveled. The most enduring and widespread fabrication about medieval women is the notion that they were perpetually confined to their homes, their lives circumscribed by domestic duties and local village boundaries. This image suggests a static existence devoid of movement, adventure, or exposure to the wider world. This is perhaps the biggest myth of all, directly contradicted by an overwhelming amount of historical evidence that shows medieval women were remarkably mobile, traveling for a multitude of reasons across various distances and social classes. Their journeys were not just exceptions, but an integral part of their daily lives and societal roles. Even at the most basic level, medieval women traveled daily for routine tasks. They walked to the local market to buy and sell goods, often carrying heavy baskets. They fetched water from wells or rivers, sometimes a considerable distance from their homes. They went to the fields to work alongside men, tending to crops or livestock. They visited neighbors, relatives, and friends, fostering community ties. These short, regular journeys, while not long distance, meant women were constantly out and about, actively engaged with their local environment, and not confined to their houses. Beyond the immediate vicinity, women routinely traveled to nearby towns or villages for more significant events. Fairs and festivals were major attractions that drew people from surrounding areas, providing opportunities for trade, entertainment, and social interaction. Women would journey to attend these events, sometimes staying overnight. Church attendance also necessitated travel, especially for those living in hamlets without a resident priest, requiring them to walk to the nearest church or abbey. Pilgrimage was a profoundly important aspect of medieval life, and women participated enthusiastically. From short trips to local shrines to epic journeys across Europe and beyond to sites like Rome, Santiago de Compostela, or Jerusalem, women embarked on these spiritual quests. They faced the same challenges as male pilgrims: harsh weather, difficult terrain, and the need for food and lodging, and endured them with determination. Accounts like Marjorie Kempes describe a woman who spent years traveling for religious devotion, experiencing a vast array of cultures and landscapes. These journeys were not just about spirituality, they were significant acts of mobility that transformed women's understanding of the world. Marriage often involved long-distance travel, especially for noble women whose alliances shaped political landscapes. A bride might journey from her birth kingdom to a foreign land to marry a prince or powerful lord, sometimes never seeing her homeland again. These journeys were carefully planned, often with elaborate retinues, but they were undeniably long-distance movements that radically altered a woman's life and environment. Even for non-noble women, marriage might involve moving to a neighboring village or a new town, requiring a journey and adaptation to a new community. Economic activities also compelled women to travel. Female merchants, as explored before, journeyed to buy and sell goods. Women seeking work as domestic servants or wet nurses would travel to households in other towns. Beggars and vagrants, many of whom were women, were constantly on the move, driven by necessity. These travels, often on foot, were essential for their survival and livelihood. The idea of women being confined to their homes is a simplified, often romanticized view of the past that ignores the practical realities of medieval life. Women were active participants in society, fulfilling roles that inherently required mobility. Their journeys, whether short or long, for work, family, religion, or survival, demonstrate a dynamic and mobile female population that defied the notion of domestic seclusion. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that medieval women were travelers, explorers of their own world, far from being bound by the four walls of their homes.